My name is Barbara Campbell. I was commissioned in 1955 in Cincinnati in a service that has never been replicated. All the boards and agencies had a single annual meeting together in the same city at the same time, and the Board of Missions had their showtime one night, and it was a commissioning service. There were about 95 of us in the group. When I was in grade school, it was the Depression, and I didn't know about it. Only when I was much older did I understand what had been happening then. My father happened to be lucky enough to have a job in another little town, so he was never home during the week. But only in retrospect, and talking to my parents when I was an adult, did I understand anything that had to do with the Depression. When I was in junior high, my part of the country had a massive oil boom, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people moved into the area. And it was a little town. We had 2 little hotels, nothing like a motel. And so everybody was looking for something to put the people to bed. And my mother and dad took in 5 oil men into our house, and they lived with us for 2 years while they built what was called the Pure Oil Village, a tank farm. And we remained close friends with them all the rest of our lives. Well, then when I was in high school, when I was a sophomore, the war started. And so all of my teen years was very much impacted by the war. And again, when I was a sophomore, I was 16. I went to work as one of the Christmas extra employees at the Woolworth store and continued to work there part-time and then full-time after I graduated from high school until I entered college several years later. So that the war was very all-consuming. We were all caught up in all kinds of ways. We all had individual cards to buy things. We bought things with points. Gas was rationed, so you didn't do much with your car except what were the absolute essentials. There were many, many things that you could not buy that only came in rarely. And all kinds of things you were supposed to do to help with the war effort. So that was very consuming. In my early teenage years, I went to Sunday school. And we had a Wednesday night program, or Wednesday afternoon program, after school program for children, which was essentially singing gospel songs and Bible studies. But apart from that, I was not involved in the church as a teenager or even after I was in high school. I got involved after I was out of high school through the influence of 2 women, one who pulled me to Christian education, one who pulled me to Wesleyan Service Guild and the Women's Society. I never heard of the Deaconess movement until I was a junior in college. It was the pattern in those days that the Women's Division sent recruiters to all the colleges and places where youth were congregated. Scarrett was a training school for both missionaries and deaconesses. Staff members regularly came down there, and if there were students who were not deaconesses or missionaries, and I wasn't interested, I didn't know about it, they talked to us. And my goal there was a degree in Christian education, and I was working towards that. And the recruiter talked to me about being a deaconess, and what the deaconess represented was what I wanted in terms of relationship to the church. It wasn't that the deaconess attracted me per se, but it was when I found out about what the deaconess represented, it was what I wanted in terms of a relationship to the church if I was going to be employed by the church. My majors, even before I was aware of the deaconess requirements, were Christian education and Bible, so I didn't have to make any adjustments there. And the curriculum was really very, very broad in terms of all the things you're concerned about now. Much less an emphasis on social justice, because social justice wasn't an issue then. It was there, but it was a very, very bottom of the heap and not a central factor at all. Well, it was my second year when. They didn't talk about integrating the school. They simply told us we were going to have 2 black students. Now, I grew up in an area that was totally white. I had no inkling of what segregation really meant or the importance of what was implied with 2 black students going to come. But I was a member of the student council, and the council began to talk about the implications of it. And one of the implications was that we could not leave the campus as an integrated group. We had to do everything that pertained to the 2 women on the campus. Now, the one exception that we were able to accomplish was that the Bethlehem Center in Nashville owned a camp out at the edge of town. And so we took a number of SCARET activities out to the Bethlehem Center camp where we could still be with each other. We did some little trickery around the edges of when we would go downtown with the black women, but we would all stand in the back of the bus with them. A couple of the folks, I didn't, but a couple of the folks tried putting on fancy outfits and calling themselves, from another country and claiming privileges which weren't really appropriate. Well, I was in college during the 50s, 50 to 54. I really didn't know much about the general church outside of my local church. I went to a church college, but that didn't really mean anything, except I just knew a bunch of preachers went to school there. What I learned afterwards was we were still in the throes of the church union from 1940. The 1952 General Conference was at a time when they were really trying to redo all the boards and agencies as it had been established in 1940. So in the general church, there was tension. Also, with the establishment of the central jurisdiction, it brought black men and women into national leadership on the boards, and there were tensions around that I had no inkling of until many years later. But it was a struggle in all the places where black men and women were coming into national leadership co-equal with white people. It was a strain on both parts. I was a director of Christian education for 4 years, and I was the first director in the Southern Illinois Conference and remained the only one for several years. And then when I moved from Illinois, I went to New York and stayed the next 37 years with the staff on the women's division. I had 3 distinct tasks, three different job descriptions. I went as in the hierarchy, I was an assistant to the secretary, not an assistant secretary, an assistant to the secretary of visual education. Today we'd say media. But our office produced film strips and motion pictures, picture packets, flat records, all the kinds of things that we do for interpretation of the program. And it was really, as archaic as it sounds today, it was pioneering stuff. Because one of the things that I did in summer programs was to teach people how to run projectors and how to run motion picture projectors. Threading a motion picture projector is a little bit of a task, and you learn that by practice, and that was one of the things that I did in the summer. And it was, you didn't do it just for the sake of the machinery, it was for the sake of knowing how to use visuals in teaching and in interpretation sessions. The second one was called leadership development, and that came after 1964 when all the staff was totally rearranged. It was a significant promotion, and I was given responsibility over all the schools of Christian mission. And at that time we had a school in every conference, and many of the conferences also had a weekend school for employed women. So I was working with the development of the curriculum, but that was in another capacity. But in the organizing and the planning of the schools and the securing of the teachers with the certification of the teachers. In addition to the schools, I was doing various kinds of leadership things with conference leadership, various kinds of workshops and training sessions. Then the third one was called administration. And there I had a variety of tasks. One, in And that somewhere along in there, I guess after I was in the administrative position, the Board of Missions organized a union. And I was the staff for the women's division with the main liaison with the personnel office as they worked with the union. I supervised 9 staff members who were stationed in offices out across the country working with the conferences, and then a lot of just day-to-day administrative things. The whole international aspect of it that was introduced to me. At Scarrett, I met a lot of international students, and I met a lot of missionaries, either candidates or on furlough, which gave me a bit of an entree to the rest of the world. I grew up pretty isolated in Southern Illinois, but the opportunity to be in the Deaconess organization and meet, number one, deaconesses ecumenically here at home, but then to go to some of the regional meetings and eventually the world meetings was a very enriching experience, and both educational and personally. But to discover that no matter your country, no matter your denomination, no matter male or female, if you wanted to stay a layperson, you had a problem. The church did not know how to deal with you if you didn't want to be ordained. And it was fascinating to discover the variations of that and how people worked to try to overcome it or to live with it. Well, if you know the history of the Board of Global Ministry, the Board of Missions and Women's Division, you know that in 1964 there was a major disruption of organization, and all the mission administrative activity for international and national missions was transferred to other portions of the Board of Missions. I was greatly disappointed, more than that, by the lack of understanding of why those institutions and programs had been so important to women. And you know, as this happened, this is the mid-60s, you're beginning to slightly move into the women's movement. And they could not everybody, but a number of the people, particularly 2 or 3 of the leaders, could not make the bridge between the importance of institutional ministries that serve women and children with the necessity of a women's movement trying to do some things. And to my real disappointment, and even somewhat today, institutional ministries were downgraded as kind of, that's not the place to go. It's movement, it's advocacy. Now, nothing wrong with that, but there needs to be more of a balance, because what the institutions represented, both in terms of leadership development and direct service, is not outdated today. We had one person who shall remain nameless, whose lack of understanding of the women's division role in providing resources for the institutions in the, I guess, in very late 60s, maybe early 70s, when there was a real financial pinch and income was coming down, and there was not enough money for the women's division to provide to the other parts of the board. He wrote to his institution and says, the cookie jar is dry. Not enough money for you, the cookie jar is dry. Well, you got to stay flexible, because you never know what the organization of the church is going to do with you, and you never know for sure what your challenges are going to be within your work. But on a more direct basis, don't forget your local church. Don't outgrow it, because once you start having experiences beyond the local church, whether they're regional or you get to general conference or you get to go internationally, sometimes going home is dull, and sometimes going back to your local church or your local United Women in Faith, it's kind of dull by comparison. Don't give up on them. That's the key to keeping you going.